Hello, everybody, and welcome to my very basic C++ tutorial that I made myself in the matter of a week or two. Through this program, I will be demonstrating a number of various aspects and uses for the C++ language, including how variables work, how expressions work, the use of conditionals, and while doing so, I will also be showcasing loops, functions, classes, and lists, all within the C++ language. So to get this thing started, I used Visual Studio Code to actually create the code, and then I also used a program called MingW64 to be able to get my hands on G++, which would allow me to compile this code into an executable form and then run it. So we're going to start off by doing that by going up to terminal and then building the task. I'll use G++. It's building. Okay, there we go. So now, as you can see, another file right here called module1.exe has shown up right here. And so now that that's there, I am able to... Okay, there we go. Now I can see my terminal. I'm able to run it simply by typing /module01. That's not a 0. Okay. It's thinking. This is a pretty big program. All right. So here's the full thing. And I'm going to walk through all of this alongside the actual code so that I can explain what's going on and how I managed to get all of this done. So, where's the beginning? Okay, there it is. So, for starters, I have up here the various libraries I need to include. IOStream, a very necessary one for C++ users up here. And then I'm also using list and iterator for later on when I get to demonstrating lists. And then I have also chosen to use using namespace std right here so that I wouldn't have to type that abbreviation for standard on nearly every line of code that I type. So first of all, we're going to start off with this function, the variable tutorial. It and the next three functions are all going to be called down here in my main function, first and foremost. And so when main calls it, it essentially runs the function and everything that happens in it. So as you can see, I have variables to output it so that each little section can be designated in the output. So right here, I'm demonstrating an int variable, or a variable that can hold any whole number. And then I am printing out that int variable by calling the variable right here. See, I've named the variable whole number and I'm calling it right here. And then down here in the terminal, it outputs as 5 because that's the number I saved to it. Below it, I have the float variable, which is similar to int, except it can save decimal numbers as well. So I've chosen 6.4 as my decimal value, and then just like with int, I have chosen to call it right here, decimal number, and then I output 6.4 down here in the terminal. Then we get to char variables, and these are a bit tricky because these are usually meant to hold just one character, I believe. However, I have been able to bypass the system by setting a size for the variable right here, 5, meaning it can hold up to 5 characters. And then I have saved bruh as the word to save in here. Now, of course, I tried this before, and if you don't set the size right here, it will simply just output the last character. So originally it was H. However, I was able to get it to output the whole word by using a loop right here, where it would iterate through each individual letter within the word, and then end up outputting all of it. So down here we have the whole word, bruh. So that's the end of variables. Now we move on to expressions, which essentially is any sort of sequence of operators and operands that can be used for any reason. So I'm going to be demonstrating a number of mathematical expressions down here. Right here we have addition. Instead of using a specific value to put in there, I've simply put 6 plus 4. And then down here in the terminal, it outputs as 10. See right here I have my print statement, and then I have the variable called right here. And then I was able to do the same thing with subtraction. 17 minus 8 equals 9. And multiplication and division. with the respective correct answers down here in the output terminal. So next we go to conditionals, which, just like every other programming language, are anything that happens under certain conditions. So if statements or switch statements. Though for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm mainly going to be focusing on if statements, since I know that those are basic. So down here, I've declared 3 different variables, value 1, value 2, and value 3, and then I've put them through a number of possible conditionals. So for the first one, I have an if statement where if value 1 is equal to value 2, then it will output this statement. And then I have an else, which declares that if this first if is not true, then the else is what happens. Now, as you can see, value 1 and value 2 are not the same. So instead of outputting the result of the first if, it instead outputs this else down here in the terminal. The first and second variables are not equal. Now I move on to my second conditional example. In this one, I use an else if statement, which, if the first if fails, it will move on to the next else if statement. And you can have about as many else if statements as you want. And it will just iterate through them in order, so long as the previous ones don't meet their conditions. And then if all else ifs fail, then we'll just result with the else statement. And unlike an else statement, an else if can have a specific conditional instead of an else where you don't really need one. Else is literally just if all else fails. So here I'm also demonstrating the use of the less than or equal to symbol. So if value 1 is less than or equal to value 2, then it will output this statement. Else if value 1 is less than or equal to value 1, it will output this statement. So, of course, value 1 is not less than or equal to value 2. It's actually greater. As you could see, 8 is greater than 6. But down here, because I'm using less than or equal to, of course, it equals itself. So, as a result, we get this else if statement is able to get its output down here in the terminal. A variable is less than or equal to itself. Now we move on to lists. Now, this is where the code will start to get a little bit different or weird. Because while I was able to have each individual tutorial just saved within each function thus far, I wasn't quite able to do the same from here on out. So with lists, I've essentially instead had to create the very basic list and iterator functions right here in the list tutorial function. And then down here in main is where all the heavy lifting is done. So where is it? List tutorial. All right, so I've essentially declared list 1 to be the list that I'm going to pass through the list tutorial function and then get all my outputs from it. So with this for loop right here, I was able to essentially create a list that was this large and then add sequential numbers to it. So down here in the terminal, we have the full list outputted. It's all digits from 0 to 9. So now with this list, I could do a number of things with it, such as outputting the first item of the list using list1.front, and that first item outputs as 0. I can also output the last item with list1.back, and that last item is 9. And then from here on, I can call the list tutorial function to essentially recreate the list with various new things in place. So with the first item removed, now you can see it is the same list, but with 0. And I've done that with this line of code right here, pop front. And then I was able to do the same with pop back with the last item removed. So now down here, it's the same list, but without 9. And then I was even able to reverse the list and make it list backwards. So now it's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we'll move on to our final portion here, and that's classes. Very similar to lists, I couldn't just have the entire thing over here in the class, especially since classes in C++ don't quite function the same way that functions do. So in C++, instead, classes are meant to create the various attributes that are needed in order for the main function to then build a number of objects from. So here in class, I have designated attributes like model, developer, color, and operating system. I'm going to be building laptops using this class right here. And also, I didn't know this until I started coding, but apparently in C++, it is important that when creating classes, you designate the level of access that this class has so that the rest of the code can access it. So right now I have public so that, this whole code has public access to this class. So down here in main, when I call the class, I could create a placeholder called PC1 for my first PC that I built using the class. So then, with each of the same attributes that are declared in that class, model, developer, color, and operating system, I'm able to save different values into them. And of course, in the class, I have saved them as strings so that I could very easily put each of these whole words into it. And then I was able to do the same, but with a second PC. As you can see, I could call it again, but instead have a different placeholder variable, PC2, and then I could create a second laptop using it. And now, with all this data that I have pulled and created, I am able to output these statements. Our first as you can see in the terminal, we have our first laptop is a black HP made by Microsoft that runs on Windows. And much of that information I pulled straight from these class attributes that I was able to build. And then I was able to do the same with the second PC as well. A white MacBook made by Apple that runs on Mac OS. And there you have it. That is my very basic C++ tutorial. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.